Hey, Emily,
Hey, Stephanie.
you want to do a podcast?
Absolutely.
Welcome to Cycle Chats, a podcast to destigmatize what it means to be a woman. This is episode 2, Girls Fight Back, featuring a top-tier self-defense entrepreneur, instructor, teacher, and CEO of Girls Fight Back, the badass herself, Nicole Snell, or as she is known on the gram, Adventures of Nick.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you. So Girls Fight Back, I'm in love with it. Tell us a little bit about what that is, what that stands for.
Well, Girls Fight Back is my organization, and we teach self-defense and personal safety to women and girls worldwide. It was started in 2001 by a woman named Erin Weed, and she started it in honor of her friend Shannon McNamara, who was tragically murdered in her off-campus apartment. And Erin decided and realized that women needed some violence prevention training that was positive, that was empowering, that was simple, that could make people feel like they could still go out and live their life without apology. And she started Girls Fight Back. I got involved with the organization in 2015 as a speaker. And here we are 6 years later, and I took over as CEO this year. And we travel all over the world teaching personal safety and empowerment. We have gender inclusive programs as well, because we believe that everybody can benefit from learning the basics of how to defend yourself. And that has just become my life mission of empowering women, empowering people to feel like they can go out and live the life that they want to live, understand that they're worth fighting for, and understand that, you know what, you are your own best protector. You don't have to rely on anyone else. You've got this.
I wish you would have been there when I was walking home late at night from college parties. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just walking home alone. I thought it was fine, but I mean, there was so much wrong with that. Somebody should have come with me.
No, you can absolutely walk by yourself. That's part of the things that we teach. We don't give people a list of don'ts. I don't tell people you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, because safety is a continuum, right? Like it's about giving us the tools to manage our safety so we can go where we want to go and do what we want to do. Now, if we're in a situation where we feel like, you know what, this is sketchy, now I need to have someone to walk with me, that's different. But just walking by yourself is not inherently like a bad thing. And I would never say like, you should always make sure you do this and that. It's about, hey, what can I do to feel the safest in this situation? And we're each able to make our own choices. And that's what it's about, giving us options.
Have you always had that strong sense of feminism about yourself? Like, did you always feel very confident? Because you exude this like safety net. You draw in so many people. So do you feel like that's something you've always had, kind of going into, because you're self-defense teacher as well, which is incredible. Have you always been like, when was your first real taste of it? And when did you know this was something I have to do?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the compliment. You know, I was a feminist before I even understood what that word meant. I've always just been, as people would try to tell me that I shouldn't want to do these things because I'm a woman or a girl, back in the day, or, girls don't do this, or you shouldn't like this. And I would think to myself, but I'm interested in it. So why should I not be able to do it just because I'm a girl? Like, that shouldn't matter. I want to be in the Young Astronauts program. I want to play RC cars with my brother. I want to, go rough and tumble on the playground, not necessarily go inside and play house. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we should be empowered to do whatever our hobbies and our enjoyments are, like wherever our desires lie. We should be able to explore those and not feel shamed for liking things that aren't necessarily fitting the gender stereotypes. So even before I had all of this terminology, I was just like, no, I'm going to do this just because I want to do it. And I would question things that I would see that I know now are traditional gender roles, just because that just didn't vibe with me. It never did. I always just felt like we should be able to do the things that we want to do. I have always been really athletic. I always loved playing sports, and I was always falling down and skinning my knees and skinning my elbows and, all of those types of things. And when I was in high school, I started I believe it was a judo class. It was like a combo judo jujitsu class. And I fell in love with the class, but I wasn't able to continue. And I just liked the idea of knowing that I can handle myself physically, just the empowerment of getting some information and some knowledge. And then, just as older and I went to college, and people would give me the same advice they gave you, Emily, like, don't walk by yourself and don't go at this place at night. And I had no self-defense training then. And I was like, screw that. I'm going to go where I want to go. and I'm just going to handle it. I always just had this confidence of like, don't you tell me what I can and can't do. Don't you try to limit me. So when I first got involved with Girls Fight Back, I had been a line producer in the production industry for 12 years. Always enjoyed being in front of people and talking, but didn't know that speaking was, like a job you could do, and had no idea. And got laid off of my position. I was the director of digital production for Endemol, and they laid off our entire department. And around the same time, I got connected with a group I was involved with in college to do sexual assault prevention training for the military. Through that, I met the then owner of Girls Fight Back. And I said, oh my gosh, you mean I can actually travel to colleges around the country and talk about self-defense? And like, this is a job? How do I get involved? How do I become a speaker? And so I asked for a job. 3 months later, they had an opening, and I started my training. Part of my training was to take a full contact class and graduate. It was a 20-hour class. Took it and said, I love this. How do I teach this too? So I got trained to do that. So I was simultaneously speaking with Girls Fight Back and traveling, and then also being trained to be a full force, full contact self-defense instructor with Impact. And then I did both of those things. And then I took over Girls Fight Back this year. So I still speak, and everything's virtual now. And I'm also a lead instructor with Impact Personal Safety. It's one of those things where when you realize that this is what you're meant to do, you realize that your entire life you've been training for this. Mm-hmm. All of my background in production, coordinating and accounting and time management and all those things all play into this. And all the experiences I've had traveling and being solo around the world really helped shape me to be able to do this. And my joy comes in knowing that I'm helping people. Like when I get messages of people telling me, I watched your video, or I came to your session, and now I feel confident to do this thing, to go on this hike by myself, or take this trip I was thinking of, or I just feel safer walking to my car at night. That just means the world to me, and I'll never stop.
That's so inspiring. Something that you talked about a little bit was gender roles, which for me, I grew up in a household where my mom much more so played the dad role, and my dad much more so played the motherly role. So when I was growing up, I didn't know that gender roles had to do anything with gender. I thought they were due to the place that they were holding in the family. So I called my mom dad and my dad mom. And I did it for a really long time in my life, and nobody corrected me, and I had to correct myself just learning. So it's something that I find really interesting. What are your views on gender roles?
I think that gender roles can be really harmful, especially if you feel forced by society to fit into a certain thing. Mm-hmm. We should all be free to choose what best suits us, and not feel like we have to do something because society says so, or it's traditional, or everyone else says I should do this, because I don't like the idea of fitting people into boxes. So I really feel like gender roles exist, and I'm sure they're probably going to exist for a long time, mm-hmm. because that's just the way we're structured. But I think as we keep having more conversations like this and breaking down, like, why do these exist? What's the history behind why these things exist? And why does it matter so much to me what somebody else does? Why does it matter so much to me what choice someone else makes? And I think that's really where the heart of it is.
That's interesting you say that too, is where does it come from? Big thing for me, I've been a freelance makeup artist for going on 13 years now. And a big piece of education came from exactly that. I had a lady one time say to me, oh, isn't it strange that boys wear makeup? And I said, well, if you actually look way back in the history books, it was a sign of opulence and royalty and status. And not only that, the reason makeup artists, the pricing wise, why it seems like makeup artists make so much more is because of the fact that most of the time the hairstylists were women and the makeup artists were men. And because of that, women got paid less. So it's really interesting when you see that dynamic go into play, is where do those gender roles, where does that come in? And I think it's a suggestion. And I think as we get older, if we nurture, especially in young women, being unafraid to ask questions, say, well, why am I doing, say no, ask questions. Why are you taking a picture of me? Why are you filming me? Why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. Be bold and be strong to be able to say that. So I find that very interesting it comes full circle, it comes into play. Do you find when you're teaching that that's one of the main points you reach for, or what do you feel is important when you are teaching self-defense to any across the board?
I think one of the most important things that I teach is that self-defense is not just physical. A lot of times people hear self-defense and they think it's automatically like, oh, you're hitting people and it's violent and things like that. And it's not all physical. In fact, most of the self-defense that I teach is non-physical. Most self-defense is non-physical. It's verbal skills. It's your intuition. It's your awareness. It's learning how to speak up for your needs. It's learning how to set boundaries. It's understanding when something feels not right. It's about having more options and tools to recognize danger and hopefully avoid danger. Like, I don't want anyone to have to fight. The goal is not to set everyone with these skills and be like, all right, you go to the worst part of the town that you're in at 2 a.m. and just go there by yourself and see what happens. Like, it's not about seeking out danger. It's about avoiding danger. Yeah. So I think that's really one of the things that I teach that I think is the most important, is that your voice is your first weapon. Your voice is powerful, and you don't have to apologize for setting boundaries. The thing that I always say is your safety comes before anyone else's feelings.
I grew up with the word sorry as this, I'm sorry for existing. I'm sorry for feeling. I'm sorry for, cutting my hair short. I'm sorry for all of this. And it's true. And I think a lot of the red flags too. There's a really good song where the girl says, it's funny how the warning signs can feel like they're butterflies. We fantasize this struggle in relationships, and it's so, we romanticize this fighting and but then passionately making up. And I think sometimes we don't even realize that we're being fed to be okay with abuse.
I know Steph and I have both been in emotionally abusive relationships before. It was terrible. I mean, it was in high school, and it was my first love. It was the first time I ever had sex. And the guy was awful. He told me to go jump off a bridge and that nobody cared. And I stayed with him for 13 months. And it didn't even occur to me that I was being emotionally abused until my mom literally sat me down and handed me a chart, asked me to fill it out. My mom's a social worker. And it pointed to the fact that I was being emotionally abused by this man that I didn't know what that was.
I'm so sorry that you experienced that. That's terrible, and nobody should have to go through that. And I want to make sure that you know that it's not your fault. When we learn self-defense, when we learn these additional skills, it's not about blaming ourselves for what we did in the past, because whatever choice you made in the past got you here today. So you did the right thing. You survived. You're here. That's the right thing. What I teach is, what are some additional tools that we can add to our toolbox, so as we move forward, now we have additional options and choices to make if we recognize situations like that in the future.
I had 2 things. So one of my relationships, when we would have sex, afterwards I'd cry. And I never realized that that was my body's emotional response of feeling not safe and feeling very controlled in the relationship. Another one was when a boyfriend punched a wall behind me, and I got scared because it was right next to my head. When I told him, I confronted him because I was getting to the point where I was like, I want to create boundaries, and I want to draw the line, and I want to speak up when I feel something is not sitting right with me, because I was trying to tap into what we know, our gut feeling, our intuition. And I said, something doesn't sit right. And I told him, and his response was, it's not like I hit you. And to me, that should have been an immediate, I'm out. And I think oftentimes women, again, it's great that you're teaching these women to have the verbal tools to say, that's not an appropriate response. I'm caring for myself. I'm drawing a line. And if you're not willing to respect it and you're going to call me names, I'm out. It's very interesting, that intuition, that the verbal skills, and you see that more now than I feel like you ever have before. I mean, I grew up traditional in the sense that kind of the older women around me would say, you just have to put that to the side, and that's just part of relationships. And to a certain degree, when you have disagreements, of course it's part of a relationship. But I saw people in relationships that was so toxic. As I started doing my own research and my own forms of verbal self-defense, I went, this is gaslighting. It's somebody love bombing. Just, it's classic behavior that I didn't even know what that word was until I started educating myself. So do you find that you run into young women that are aware, or do you have light bulb moments where they say, oh my God, this is happening to me right now.
Had people tell me after a presentation, either in person or virtually, and mention like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this was happening, but based on what you said, like now I know, or something didn't feel right and now I know. Or people have said, I'm in a situation like this now and you've just given me help. I've had people tell me I just got out of a situation like that. So that's part of the reason why I became a victim advocate. So I'm a certified victim advocate from NACP, which is National Advocacy Credentialing Program through NOVA. I had people coming to me with their stories, survivors, and I wanted to learn how to properly respond and offer the right kind of support for the type of trauma that people were coming to me with. Mm-hmm. And so I have people come to me with all sorts of stories and experiences, and I always thank them for trusting me to share with them. I think that the more education is out there, the better off we're going to be, Yeah. So now when I grew up, you were a kid. You didn't have a say over who you could and couldn't hug in the family. It was just like, oh, you hug so-and-so, and that's just what you didn't have that bodily autonomy. And there weren't really any conversations that I can remember about talking about, like, how do you talk to somebody? How do you communicate what you need? It wasn't really talked about. And I think that's really important. And a big part of self-defense is I want to train people how to say yes when they mean yes. But I also want them to understand how to say no when they mean no, and to understand the difference. And that consent is a big thing. It's not just when it comes to sex, it involves everything. And when we have the tools to feel like we can speak up for ourselves and our boundaries, that can mitigate so many situations, and it can prevent things from getting to a physical place. It can often prevent. Of course, there's never any guarantees, but these skills are really monumental in helping to create boundaries and to help people really understand that they're worth fighting for and that their feelings matter. So one of my favorite parts when I present is I talk about a situation where, like, okay, have you ever met someone who's super nice and they're really like oozing with this, like, trying to butter you up, and then here's something you could say. You can tell them, I'm not interested in having a conversation with you. And everybody always breaks out laughing. And I say, why? Why is that so funny? They're like, oh my gosh, that's so mean. That's so rude. And I'm like, but is it though? You weren't being mean. You didn't say, hey, jerk, stop talking to me. You just said, I'm not interested in having a conversation. And this comes from all gender audiences. People laugh at this. And it's this sense of we are so conditioned socially to take care of the feelings of other people that we are not always comfortable taking care of ourselves. And we think that taking care of ourselves means we're being mean or we're being rude. And that's not the case. Like, we can set our boundaries and we can say, look, I'm not interested in having this conversation, or, I'm not interested in this anymore, or I really don't like it when you sit this close to me. We can say these things and it's okay.
It kind of reminds me of something new that I've been really trying to work on, is the toxic positivity, where you tell yourself, oh, just smile. It's fine. It could always be worse. Don't cry. People have it worse off than you. And I notice sometimes that's put on us as well, and on anybody, is that sometimes you have to cry. Sometimes you have to let it out. And I'm not okay, and that's okay. I think this sense of, namaste your way through it, while it's wonderful in some aspects, I think forces people to choke down the reality that we are all human beings. And we all have needs and wants and desires. And if you don't feel that you are your best self to partake in something, then that's okay.
When you set a boundary with someone, how they respond is going to give you a lot of information about them. And you set a boundary with someone and they respond like getting angry, like, okay, you know what? Maybe they had a bad day and they just took your boundary real bad and they got mad. But you know what? That's a real good person. If that's someone you want in your life, they'll probably come back a day or two, a few hours later and say, hey, you know what? I overreacted. If they don't, that gives you information about them. And then you get to decide if you want someone like that in your life. So when you set a boundary, one of my co-instructors at Impact said this, and I always use this now, but I always want to credit him. He said, boundaries are not just for safety, they're also educating other people on how we want to be treated.
I love that. And it's true. You teach people how to treat you. I think when I was younger, I was such a people pleaser, and that sometimes will still come up. And those feelings, I'll have to stop. And I ask myself, why do I feel the need to say this? Why do I feel the need to reach out to this person when they've given me the answer? Sometimes it's because I feel they're upset with me. I said, well, is that the worst thing? You told them you didn't want to do something. So now that's not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. From where I was and to where I am now, what a difference, like how your brain develops. Do you feel from where you were when you were younger? Did you feel you always had that tenacity to speak up for yourself, or did you find that that was something that came over time?
It's layered. It's not as simple as a yes or no answer, because there's some aspects of my life where to this day I still have trouble, where I'm like, oh gosh, are they mad at me? And I think to myself, come on, Nicole, pull it together. It doesn't matter. But we all have our own trauma and our own memories and our own experiences that layer onto us and make us the complex humans that we are. So there's always been ways in which I've been willing to speak up for myself. And then there's ways when I was younger where I maybe wasn't as comfortable speaking up, especially when it came to relationships, that I'm definitely better at that now. 100% better at that now. And that's one of the reasons why I really like teaching the high school students. And when we can get tweens and like junior high school students teaching them, I think that's so important, because I wish I would have had this information back then.
I am going back to school right now to become a middle school drama teacher, because I love that age group. For me, that was like the most important time of my life, because I really think it shaped who I was. And I wish I would have had somebody who would have listened and understood and answered the tough questions, because you're feeling all sorts of things when you're 13, and maybe you're unaware of what those things are. You're also starting to menstruate around that age. So just so many hormones are going on in your little body that you may not understand it, but somebody who's already gone through it can maybe help guide you through. And I know that even when I was, like 13, which was 15 years ago, it was very different. We lived in a very different world. I see that my nieces are growing up now and they have very different attitudes. I remember I watched my one niece, I was babysitting her. She's all dressed up in her princess gown and we're singing from Cinderella. And I said, oh, and now your prince comes. And she looks me square in the face and she goes, I don't need a prince. And I was like, that's what we need. We need these women to say, you know what? I don't need a man. I don't need a man. But when I was being brought up and when I was that age, I was like, oh, okay. So eventually I'm going to grow up. I'm going to have the white picket fence. Everything's going to be okay. I'll have a dog. I'll have a husband. I'll have kids. But life happens and so much gets in your way. It's your responsibility and your choice to either climb the ladder or let yourself sink. And I chose to climb. I was like, I'm not done with my education. I want to continue. I think it's important. And I want to give back. That's so important to me as a woman, to be able to give back to the younger generation of women out there.
Or empower people to be able to make their own choice. Like for some women, like marriage is, and having a family like that to them is their, like, that is what they were meant to do. And I know plenty of women like that where they're phenomenal parents, and that's been their goal. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's other women where they're like me, like I don't have children. I don't plan to have children. And I have other goals with my life, and that's fine too. And everything in between. It's about not assuming that we have to go one path, that there's not only one right path. There's many right paths. And when I was growing up, it was very common still that, the whole idea was like, you're supposed to get married. Like that was just kind of part of your life. And if you didn't, there was something wrong with you. Or if that's not what you were hoping to do, that there was something wrong with you. And I never swallowed that even as a little kid. I was like, well, what if I don't want to? What if I want to do this and do this and do this? And I think that letting people see that there's many other options to live, there's many other ways to be happy, there's many other ways to have your life and do the things you want to do, that's just really important to show all the differences.
I'm glad you brought it up, because we have a very good friend of ours who, she is like strong superwoman, and we call her strong woman. She always talks about, she's like, I could choke a man with my thighs. She was raised to have a career, to be successful, to be independent. And she said, I wouldn't mind a partner, but it's not something I need. It's so refreshing, I think, when you speak with different women who you haven't lived until you've had kids. I've had that too. How do you not have kids? How are you not married? I think we forget we're not just little Barbie dolls in boxes waiting to be played with. We're in charge of making those decisions. And again, I think outside factors, and this plays into too, even for young boys as well. We're so shoved into believing as the man, you have to be the provider, you have to not show emotion. And as the woman, it's okay if they're emotional and just find a man to take care of you. And it could not be further from the truth. And I think for those of us who, I come from a very traditional background, I fight with that. I do. I struggle with, do I want these things, or do I want these things because it's what my family wants for me? And I find myself always fighting with, when you have that thought, you have to kind of go through the journey and you have to say, again, unpacking your own baggage, so to speak. And sometimes you have to look inward. And I like to call them mirror moments, where you have to look in the mirror and you have to say to yourself, hey, is this really for me? And can I really be honest about this? And if the answer is no, then that's okay. What is it that I do want? But giving ourselves the permission to accept something that's out of the norm.
You know, I've been married for, I think it's 19 months now. And my husband is also going back to school, but he's kind of in this unaware position where he's not really sure what he wants to do. And yet I'm like, really sure. I've always been sure of exactly what I want to do. I want to be an actor if I can for as long as I can. And then teaching fell into my lap and I was like, wow, I love this. And I'm hoping to be the breadwinner so that he can go and live his dreams and do his thing and figure himself out, because I already know, but I was lucky enough to get the chance to do that or fall into it because my brother pushed me in the pool of drama. But, you know, my husband's not as lucky. He's still kind of, I know that I like this and I know that I like this, but I don't know how to yet put them together. So if I can give him the opportunity to go and explore his self and his beliefs and all of that amazing stuff, I just think that could be the greatest gift that I could ever give him. And then we were talking about kids and marriage and stuff like that. Like I said, we've been married for 19 months. And a lot of the times we get asked, why are you not pregnant yet? I just had a friend of mine say, oh, I can't believe that you haven't gotten pregnant during quarantine. I don't want them right now. I'm not ready for them financially, emotionally. I know Miguel and I couldn't handle it. I just know that I'm unready for that part of my life to begin. So I'm taking the smart choice and saying, no, I'm okay. I'd like another 4 years to just be me and him and figure out what this is marriage-wise and then move on from there. But the pressure is crazy. You just get it all the time to just reproduce. And I'm like, yo, I'd much rather be happy in this lovely house that we bought than to be out on the street or have to move back in with my parents because we had kids and we can't afford anything else. I don't want to do that.
Pressure to fit into traditional gender roles. And it's just, we should just let people live the life that they want. And whatever works for them. Everyone's an individual person. Every couple is an individual partnership. They should get to decide what works for them instead of being shamed from the outside for, different reasons. It's like you can never please everyone. I have been told from the time I was 8 years old, when I knew I didn't want kids, to this very day, oh, you'll change your mind. Oh, you just have to meet the right man. Are you sure? And my thought to them is always like, well, why is it I have to change my mind for someone? Like, if the right man comes along, he won't want kids either. Or maybe he wants kids and he meets me and I change his mind. Like, why does it have to be the other way around? And if I'm waiting on some imaginary future man to change my mind, should I also wait to make every other life decision because some man might, should I not buy a house in LA because a man that I meet might want to live in Florida? Like, I'm not going to do that for any other major life decision. I know how to make my own decision. And you know what? If I did change my mind, you know what? I'm allowed to do that too. But people shouldn't be putting their values and their judgment and their opinions on what you should, like, that's a very personal choice. It's a very personal question. And yet it's thrown around as like, oh, what are you having for dinner? Oh, you're gonna have babies? It's like, no. Like, that's a very personal thing that you don't get to dig into my personal decisions like that.
Also, interestingly enough, I think a lot of times too, going back to, stereotyping, there's a friend of mine, lovely man, extremely talented makeup artist. And someone said, oh, when you meet the right girl. And he said, well, what makes you think that I'm interested in women? And then somebody said, oh, you're into men. What a shame. Now, I am guilty of saying this phrase when I was younger because it was something that I echoed, I parroted because I heard it. And then he explained one day, story, he said, yeah, and that makes me feel really bad because why is it a shame that I'm not with a woman? Wonder if I'm with somebody that cares for me deeply and loves me for who I am. And why is it a shame? Because we fight so hard to be who we are and to be heard as strong women. Well, maybe everybody doesn't identify as a strong woman. Maybe they identify as a strong man or a strong they. And it's not our place. It's not hurting us. But the fact you even made the step to say, hey, what are your pronouns? How do you like to be called? Because that's not your decision to make.
If you mess up someone's pronouns, like you ask what they are, and then you slip to say, I'm really sorry, I meant to say this. And most of the people that I have met that have given me their pronouns and I've messed it up in some way just because I wasn't thinking, and I say, I'm really sorry, I meant to say, this one. They're like, yeah, you know what? Thank you for apologizing. I know you didn't do it maliciously. You weren't purposely misgendering me. And it's important for us as allies to not harp on it and keep apologizing, apologize, the correct pronoun, and move on and just make a conscious effort to call the person by the right pronoun going forward.
Yeah, that's super important. I have a cousin, I'm 28 and he is 27. He grew up as a female and transitioned probably starting, I think it's probably 8 years ago now, which is crazy. And sometimes I'll still slip up because I grew up with him in a certain way that it's just like my brain farts all the time. And I just see him as this one person, but he's still the same person. It's just I have to use the correct pronoun. So I'll always go back and apologize because I feel really bad because I accept him and I love him no matter what. So for our generation and above, it's learning and correcting. I am learning every day from the kids that I teach, and they're learning from me. And that's the way it is. Like, I'm reading all about positive communication and how that affects a classroom. And it really is a two-way street. It's about creating positive relationships. If you put positivity out in the world, I really do think you get it back. It's important and it's special. It makes me feel good to be able to produce something that other people get to smile about or just have a good thought and say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way.
Gosh, when I was in college, I almost switched my major from speech to linguistic anthropology because I was so fascinated with how language connects people and how it evolves. And like even now, our language about how we refer to the LGBTQ community and the language around gender and gender pronouns, we weren't having these conversations 5 years ago. Even in terms of like the systemic inequality and racism and the Black Lives Matter movement and indigenous rights, like there's a lot of language that is forming and shifting and growing as we learn and educate ourselves more. Like you never stop learning. You're just constantly going to try, like you do the best you can with what you know. And then when you know better, you do better and you learn more and you just keep evolving. So it's a living, breathing thing that I think that we just have to accept that that's what it is. That we can't try to be like, no, it has to be this way. No, language is going to grow. And it's just what it does, and let's roll with it and try to be as respectful of others as we can be.
Yeah. The best way to do it is just to educate yourself. Go out, read those articles, get books. That's what I've been trying to do as much as possible so that I can educate myself better. I go back to my nieces and I think about it, and they'll never know a time, hopefully, gay marriage is not allowed. They'll never know of that time. And that makes me so happy that they can grow up and look at my brother who got married to his husband and be a part of their wedding and be the flower girls and never have to say, oh, well, why does Uncle Matthew and Uncle Adam love each other? I don't understand. It's a man and a man. It was never a question. It was just taught to them and they accepted it because, hey, that's the way it is.
And that goes right back to what we are taught when we are younger absolutely affects us into how we respond as adults. So the fact, Nicole, that you're taking the time to teach not only physical self-defense, but verbal self-defense, I think it just brings the conversation full circle. Words are so powerful, and how we use them, it's everything. And in being able to open the door to sit, to break bread, and to speak to somebody who has different views than you. Ask, why do you feel that way? And that kind of brings me to, who do you feel in your life has served as a role model in that way?
Say, oh, my sister Michelle, she would not say that she was a role model, but I always say that she was a role model. So she's 7 years older than me, and I would always look up to her. She played an instrument, she ran track, she was really smart in school, and I always said to myself, I want to be just like her. So I played an instrument, but it was a different instrument, and I played sports, but they were different sports than her, and I wanted to be valedictorian of my high school class like she was, and I did. And I looked to her because she's always so strong and steadfast, and as she's grown older, I feel like is even better with her boundaries. And I have my best friend Susie is also like this, like just so amazing at compartmentalizing things and being able to like set boundaries in, with one person, but for different instances, for instance, like personal versus business or things like that. And I'm just always so in awe of people that can do that so efficiently and I'm still learning from them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to stop learning. I'm always going to find better ways of saying things or speaking up for myself. It's just that Michelle, my sister Michelle, is just so good at speaking up for what she knows is right. And even in the face of like overwhelming adversity, like I've just seen her just stand strong and just be like, nope, it's going to be this. And I feel like I do that in a lot of ways, but she does it in other aspects of her life that I wish I could be as comfortable doing it in all aspects that she's comfortable doing it in all aspects.
That's amazing. I love siblings. Steph and I both have siblings, and they're the best people that I know. They're my best friends, and I wouldn't do anything without them. I have 2 older brothers. They're 8 and 10 years older than me. And even though my parents, I'm very much them, I am my brothers. I am part Matthew and I am part Zachary. I really am 50-50 made up of both of them. I see their attributes all the time. They are my role models every day. I tell them all the time.
It influences you. I have an older brother, but he treated me like he didn't care, because my mom said, you're going to have a little sister. And to him, that just meant he had someone else to play with. And he would teach me self-defense. So he would teach me how, if somebody attacked me from behind, to grab their arm and then with my body weight, turn to the side, flip them over, pin them down, whatever. Yeah. So he did all that with me. So I kind of grew up, I feel the same, is that you look, I think, to your sibling for those attributes. And there are things that he is so good at doing in a different way. And I'm just like, I admire that, with how his sense of logic and his just sense of self and the kind of the hunger for knowledge. So I think siblings play a humongous part in your development as you become older. So you said something about, in the face of adversity with your sister, she would be true and steadfast. Do you find that, being a woman in your profession, do you find that men treat you differently?
Yes and no. Sometimes when I would tell people, like men that I teach self-defense, one of the canned responses I always get is, oh, I better not mess with you. And I'm like, okay, really? We're going to do this? Like, no, you don't have to worry about me unless you're trying to attack me. And then, yes, I will hurt you. Or they'll be like, someone's like really taller or larger than I am. And they'll be like, oh, you think you could take me down? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But I'm not gonna, because I don't want to hurt you. But I could absolutely take you down. It's not about us being in a cage and like fighting. I'm not talking about having a fist fight with you. I'm talking about like, can I take you out by hurting you enough to where I can run away? Absolutely. And that's just what it is. But I get that. And then I am so grateful to know so many wonderful people in the self-defense industry. A lot of people that I work with through Impact and through Empowerment Self-Defense Global, people of all genders, men, women. And the men that I've worked with have been just amazing, just so willing to share knowledge, hear things from my perspective. We put our brains together and we all work from our different experiences, because we're all working towards one goal, which is ending violence against women, ending violence against people. And so we're getting all of our knowledge and we're putting it together. At the same time, you sometimes have people that find you on Facebook or Instagram, and they have their ideas of how things should be taught. And self-defense is, for a long time was a male dominated teaching structure. And so there is a stereotype around that men are therefore the experts on safety and physical things. And that's not true. I'm a woman. I walked my whole life as a woman. So I know a thing or two about how I need to defend myself and things that work for me that may not necessarily work for a man. So sometimes I'll run into people that will be very headstrong in a certain philosophy and will try to challenge me or to, tell me that I'm wrong, or no, you should be doing it this way. And it's like, you know what? Self-defense is also a living, breathing thing. It's not either or, it's both and. It's not about, I always teach self-defense is not about what you should do. It's what can you do? In this situation, can I do a really fancy move? Cool. If I'm in a situation where I have to do something that looks terrible, but it gets my hand in their face enough to where I can hurt them and run away, great. So I'm teaching very simple, practical things that people can use who aren't trained, who are any body size, body type, ability level, experience level, and teaching them some really simple things that anybody can do in a stressful situation to get out of an attack. And I think that that's so valuable to teach people these things. When I encounter people who have different beliefs than I do, depends on how they approach me. If they approach me disrespectfully, I just block them. I mean, I'm just not even going to entertain that. But if it's something where we can have a conversation and we should like, okay, well, sure, you could do this or you could do this. And, this is great. But sometimes people come to you as in like, I am the expert and I know everything. And none of us are really like completely experts. Like, we're the experts of ourselves, but we're not the experts of other people. So I always tell people, you're the expert of your own personal security. I'm here to give you some additional tools and options so you get to pick what works for you. Like, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you, hey, here's a toolbox that you pick, because every situation is going to be different. Every person's different. Every person is different at different times of the day. So that's why having options is so important. I guess that's a long answer to your question. For the people who I know and who I work with, colleagues, it's all very respectful. We are all very collaborative. And then the world at large sometimes is not. For the most part, it is still very welcoming and ready to accept that women know a thing or two about self-defense. And for the people who aren't ready to accept that, I'm not here to try to change your mind, because you're not my audience. You're not my audience. My audience is the people who are looking for people like me and the methods that I teach to teach them. So that's great. You don't believe in what I do? Cool. You go teach your thing with your audience, and I'm going to keep seeking out my audience to teach them.
So do you think that there's a specific method or quick little something that every person should know in a stressful situation?
Learn how to put your hands up and say no, and trusting your intuition. Really, I mean, those are the best things that you can use anytime, anywhere, any place, with anybody. That is setting a physical boundary with your body. Being able to put your hands up, knowing that you're worth fighting for, and being comfortable with saying what you need and trusting your intuition. I think those are two things that we can take with us anywhere.
So with that, I think the last thing that we want to say is we hope you sync up with us next time.